Hey, Fundamentals of Art, let's talk a little bit more about color. And once again, we're going to look at the color wheel. We last time talked about placement of colors on the color wheel. Today we're going to talk just real briefly about how those colors kind of can interact with each other. But before we get into that, let's talk about tints and shades of color. When we think about colors, we can think about the idea of a hue. And hue is basically just another name for a color. So red is a hue, blue is a hue, orange is a hue. So hues are basically just the color. Now, if we want a color that is lighter than the normal hue, we want a lighter value of it, we would add white to that hue, or we would add white to that color. So for example, with red, you add white to it and you would get a pink sort of color. When you add white to a color and you get a lighter value, that's called a tint. Now, I know that might be kind of confusing because we think about, like, in a car, if you tint your windows, you make them darker, not lighter. But in terms of color theory, tints are lighter than the normal hue. They're lighter than the normal value. So again, add white to red, you get pink. Pink is a tint of red. So the opposite of that is shades. You add black to a color, you make it darker than it normally is, and that would be considered a shade. So let's look at red again. You add black to red and you get maroon. Maroon would be considered a shade of red. So tints, lighter than the normal hue. Shades, darker than the normal hue. Pink, a tint of red. Maroon, a shade of red. Okay, so that's just tints and shades. Now, jumping back to the color wheel, we're going to talk for just a couple minutes about color schemes or color harmonies. I use those terms interchangeably. I don't care which one you call it, color scheme or color harmony. In either case, here's what it is. It's selective use of color. In other words, you're deciding, I'm just going to use these colors. So for example, you redecorate your bedroom. And if you're like me, you say, wow, I want my bedroom to be orange and purple and green. Not really. But let's say that's what you decided, orange, red, and green for your bedroom. That's the color scheme that you selected on, orange and green and red. Let's say that you are deciding you are going to do a painting and you want the painting to be all blues and greens. That would be a color scheme or a color harmony. You've decided on those colors. So any choice of specific colors within a piece of art is a color scheme or a color harmony. However, there are some color schemes that tie in directly with how colors are placed on the color wheel. These are kind of standard color schemes. The first one we'll look at is a monochromatic color scheme. And as you can probably guess, a monochromatic color scheme, note mono in there, means it's just one color, plus tints and shades of that color. So you decide that you are going to do a very sad looking painting and it's all going to be blues. That's a monochromatic color scheme. You can do darker blues, you can do lighter blues, but it's all blues. It's one color. That's monochromatic. So that's one type of color scheme. Second type of color scheme is a complementary color scheme. Now, what are complementary colors? Complementary colors are two colors that are directly across from each other on the color wheel. They're two colors that you can draw a straight line between the two colors and it'll divide the color wheel in half. So for example, red and green are complementary colors. Okay, so anyway, two colors directly across from each other on the color wheel. They split the color wheel in half. Those are complementary color schemes. In a sense, it's like those colors are the farthest apart from each other that two colors on the color wheel can be. They can work really well together though, and in fact, if you use two complementary colors together in a piece of art, they can really make each other more powerful, especially if you're layering one on top of the other. It can make them both more vibrant. So a complementary color scheme, it uses complementary colors. It uses two colors directly across from each other on the color wheel. And of course, you can use tints and shades of those colors as well. Okay, so that's complementary color scheme. The next type of color scheme is an analogous color scheme. And an analogous color scheme uses colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. Might be 2, might be 3, might be 4 colors, but it's colors that are directly next to each other on the color wheel. So it's colors that are very closely related. And again, it might be 2, might be 3, it might be 4. So for example, if you decided that you were going to use red and red-violet and violet in a composition, that would be an analogous color scheme or color harmony. So again, colors that are next to each other on the color wheel, that's an analogous color scheme. And then the third type of color scheme, I guess fourth type of color scheme I want to talk about is a triad color scheme or a triad color harmony. And as you can probably guess, it involves 3 colors. And those colors are equidistant from each other on the color wheel. They're the same space apart from each other on the color wheel. In fact, if you connect them, you'll get a perfect triangle. You'll get a triangle where all 3 sides are the same. So that is a triad color scheme or a triad color harmony. So your primary colors would be a triad, or your secondary colors would be a triad. You can also do triads with tertiary colors as well. But again, it's 3 colors that are directly proportionate to each other. They're equidistant apart from each other on the color wheel. They'll form a perfect triangle if you connect them on the color wheel. So again, monochromatic, 1 color plus tints and shades of that color. Complementary color scheme, 2 colors directly across from each other on the color wheel plus tints and shades of those colors. Analogous color scheme, colors that are next to each other on the color wheel plus tints and shades of those. And a triad color scheme or a triad color harmony, colors that are equidistant from each other on the color wheel. Those different types of color schemes are going to play an important part in the next color-related assignment that you are going to be doing here in Fundamentals of Art.